of our panel is rating the Clean Energy Fund. And let me just break that down. What that means is on your gas and electric bill, there is a portion on it which you pay, which is called a societal benefit. And that particular part is supposed to go to what they call the Clean Energy Fund, Clean Energy Program, such as the Low Income Heat Assistance Program, such as the Climate Partners, and to assist in weatherization and other programs. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Drew. Let me introduce my panel. Drew Thompkins, who is with the New Jersey Work Environmental Council. Reverend Fletcher Harper, who is the Executive Director of GreenFaith. Let me get it right, GreenFaith International. And Tanisha Garner of the Ironbound, who is the organizer for the Ironbound Super Neighborhood Council.
President, but yeah.
So at this time, I'm going to turn it over, put it in the hands of Drew Thompkins, who will break down some of the statistics as it relates to the Societal Benefits Fund. Drew?
Yes, thank you, Reverend Tuff. And thank you all for being here today and for having me to speak on this. As Reverend Tuff said, I'm Drew Thompkins. I am with the New Jersey Work Environment Council, and I am the Director of Advocacy and Policy. So I handle a lot of the work that the organization does. Normally, we're on the other side of the street, so I would say across the street, but I guess down the street on this side over at the legislature. And talking about the Clean Energy Fund and the Societal Benefits Charge, this is an issue that my organization, unfortunately, has been working on for about 10 to 15 years every budget season. I say unfortunately because every year, no matter the administration, there's been proposed raids to the Clean Energy Fund. And the same is true again this year. This year, there's a proposed raid of $83.3 million, which, if you're familiar with the state budget, that might not sound like a lot of money. I know to the average person, it's a ton of money, but to a state budget of 40 billion, it's not a huge amount of money, but they still continue to raid this money. And it's a big deal because the Societal Benefits Charge brings in so this year it's $344.6 million. So that means they're raiding roughly 1/8. And that's $1 out of $8 that all of us pay on our electricity bills under that Societal Benefits Charge is going to something that isn't what it's supposed to be going to. It does go to New Jersey Transit, the largest portion for their operating expenses. That's the largest diversion. But we shouldn't be robbing Peter to pay Paul. My organization is very supportive of NJ Transit. We actually would love to see a dedicated funding source for NJ Transit, but we shouldn't be funding operations out of the Clean Energy Fund, which can be used for a lot of the things Reverend Tuff mentioned. And I plan to highlight a few of the other programs, especially because so many of these programs, in addition to pushing our state forward on our clean energy goals, they also help low and moderate income families directly through energy cost savings. So post-raid budget, I have actually the numbers in front of me, roughly 1/5 of the money, so after the raid, goes to the Comfort Partners program. The Comfort Partners program is for families that make up to 250% of the federal poverty line. So it's low and just getting into moderate income families in our state to increase their energy efficiency. So this can be through updating appliances, through insulation, through programs like that, and through initiatives like that, so that they can lower their energy bills. And we all know how expensive energy can be in the state. I remember my first apartment that was all electric. I lived in a 650 square foot apartment, and some months was paying $150 a month in an electric bill because it was all old electric appliances and heating and air conditioning. And that's just such a huge burden. So if we can get folks to be able to move to these more energy efficient appliances to weatherize their houses, it lowers their electricity bill and basically puts money right back into the hands of New Jerseyans who need it most. And again, that program could be larger if this money wasn't being rated. And in addition to that, there are programs that the Clean Energy Fund pays for that go to municipalities, such as replacing streetlights, old streetlights with LED streetlights, which lowers the electric cost for municipalities, which of course has a downstream effects to municipal budgets and property taxes in the long run, if we can make sure we're upgrading those systems. It also gives money to the Economic Development Authority to really push our clean energy goals forward. So there are grant programs that go out through EDA to support offshore wind, to support solar. And then there are some initiatives that they run every year. Things like community energy planning grants, so that communities can figure out what the best energy systems are for their area and how they can increase energy efficiency, switch over to clean energy. They have a new pilot program they're proposing this year, which is the Heat Island pilot, which of course is for our cities, which as many of you know, that's where we have these large heat island effects, which have public health concerns. And this would be funded through the program, and also electric vehicles. So, especially I think right now, we're all very sensitive to how expensive gas is. And if you're in the market for a new car, electric vehicles is a way to go, both for the climate impacts, because you're going to be reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are being put into the air, but also it will save you money at the pump and in the long run over the life of owning the vehicle. And so they offer the grant program there that reduces the cost of a vehicle by up to $4,000 to make it more comparable to your standard fuel combustion engine. And so all of these programs are great, but as I mentioned, they're doing it with only 7/8 of the budget that they should have. So instead of being able to do basically multiply everything there by 112%, they could be doing it at that level. That's a huge difference in some of these programs that are running on, $50 million budgets. They could be running on something like a $70 million budget. That's a huge deal for a lot of these programs, and could affect a lot more people and make sure we are increasing energy efficiency across the state. So what we're doing, and we feel good, I think this year, hopefully, that we can end this raid, because as some of you may know, the state budget came in, the treasurer mentioned recently, there had been quite a large unanticipated tax revenue that came in. The state basically has a surplus of $10 billion. We're asking for $83 million to be basically moved to pay for NJ Transit out of the general fund and make sure that the societal benefits charge is going to where it's supposed to go to fund the Clean Energy Fund, to fund these projects. Senator Andrew Zwicker from the 16th district, so just north of here, is leading a budget resolution that's S373. And I actually have a letter for any legislators that are here to have them sign on to that budget resolution that would end the raids in this year's budget and fully fund the Clean Energy Fund, which is something that we need to do, because these programs, they help members of the community directly. They also help the state move forward on clean energy. And as we're moving forward on clean energy and energy efficiency, that's a job creator in the state as well, which is something my organization cares about, often good paying union jobs here. So this is just really should be a no-brainer. When we have the funds, this is the year to finally end the raids. And so I thank you for your time and be happy to answer questions. I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Harper.
Thanks. And Drew covered the key sort of factual pieces of the picture. I think what I'll say just for a minute or two is for New Jersey Black Issues Convention, for its constituents to recognize this as an opportunity to take a strong stand on this issue, and to say that these funds need to be going into the community to create jobs that will benefit the community. We know that there's an enormous workforce that's required to get the state to transition away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. There's job training needs that are very substantial that you're going to hear about on a subsequent panel. And there are faith-based and community-based organizations in the community that are ready to step forward and to do that work. Andre Thomas from Isles and the Center for Andre has been, the leader in the state on, training, workforce development training around a host of green energy job opportunities. And this is, these jobs cannot be outsourced. They represent skilled trade work that is one part of the backbone of building a middle class in a sustainable way. And that money absolutely ought to be going into creating those types of opportunities. What we've seen along with the Work Environment Council, GreenFaith is part of the Jersey Renews Coalition. What we've seen over the years is that there's been an awareness and a number of environmental groups primarily speaking out about the fact that these raids on this fund are just wrong. Where my neck of the woods, someone once upon a time, a long time ago, said, "Thou shalt not steal." There's but the reality is there has not been a sustained focus on this issue either from faith communities or from Black and Brown communities across the state. And we would strongly encourage NJBIC we would be very glad to work with you all to think through what would be the use to which funds like this should be put. Drew is completely right. The state's public transit system is important and needs to have its own dedicated source of funding. It shouldn't be funded by a budget rating gimmick at the 11th hour. And so I think what I would say to wrap up is that there's an opportunity here to secure a substantial flow of resources that can be enormously helpful to the community. And from where we sit, we see a substantial opportunity for an organization like NJBIC to step forward and play a leading role in calling for that, in advocating for that, and in making, you've already got here in the room with Andre and others, Sid Nathan from, there are a whole bunch of folks who would be very glad to be in support of that. I think it's a very important opportunity. And I think, Tanisha is going to talk about, what kind of difference this makes at the community level, but at the state political level, I think this is an opportunity that is really worth paying attention to.
Thank you, Tanisha.
Hi, my name is Tanisha Garner, and I'm the president of Ironbound Super Neighborhood Council. So if you're familiar with the Ironbound, I also live in Ironbound. So Ironbound is considered an environmental justice community, which is in the city of Newark. And we was deemed by the DEP and also the EPA as an environmental justice community, which means that we have several brownfields located on the site throughout the neighborhood. We also have PVSC, which is trying to build nuclear power plants in the middle of the community. We also have the Passaic Valley is the one who's doing that wants to do the nuclear plant. We also have Covanta, which is the incinerator that collects garbage from all different municipalities and also out of the state. And we also connected to major highways which go through our community. And so that's why it's important for us to have, for the clean energy funding to be funded correctly. And also, we also are the international hub that's connect the world, because we have New Jersey Transit and we also have the airport. And if you imagine how the city of Newark has changed over the years and how it's being gentrified now, for instance, how they just tore down the first historically HUD building, which was Seth Boyding, and they're going to turn it into Lionsgate Studio. So just imagine the impact and the infrastructure that they need for the airport and also New Jersey Transit to deal with the different clients or different agencies that's going to be traveling through the city of Newark. And I think they need to take that into effect, especially when they talk about job creation. How can you create jobs when you are disproportionately putting us in positions where we have to be pushed out? So how are you going to protect us? one is the housing situation, because everything is holistic. They always look at one part, but if you don't have an adequate housing that's affordable for all, that is going to be detrimental to how the city of Newark is going to happen, also throughout the state of New Jersey. So when we talk about the clean energy rate and also funding New Jersey Transit, how is that going to impact everyone as a whole? So for instance, how you just mentioned about the heat island effect, and the heat island effect affects us every day, especially through the bad smells that we have to smell through every day. And also by the lack of trees that when developers come in and they're supposed to put in as part of their plan to build more trees, they are not doing that. So how are we going to do this holistically to make sure everyone has a great quality of life? In order for employers to have employees, that's the only way big business makes money. So if you do not take care of your employees, how is the employers going to be able to make the money that they need to make? And I think that's why they had to look at it from a holistic point, and everyone has to work together in synergy. And then also about this, the electrification. We're not thinking about what's going to happen to the countries, particularly in South America, when they have to get the lithium that's going to actually create the batteries that's going to be able to power these buses or these cars to move. And how is that going to affect us as a global light? So people need to realize that everything is connected, whether it be internationally to domestically, and what are we going to do to protect the human race as a whole? So that's why it's important for us to be able to strategize and talk to communities and also overseas communities to figure out how can we make these pieces of the puzzle blend in together to make ourselves self-efficient. Thank you.
At this point, I'd like Drew to comment on how many times has the Clean Energy Fund been rated?
Oh, yeah, we are up. Yeah, we're over 10, I think just short of 15. I'd have to go back and look exactly. I mean, this has been happening since, I think this is before the Christie administration. So, I mean, this is a very long time it's been happening. We're approaching, and this year might put us right on the edge of $1.5 billion being diverted from the Clean Energy Fund. So, we've seen some decrease in the diversion over the last few years, but it's still at 80 million. I think at the height it was close to 150 million that was being diverted. So yeah, this is a long-term issue that goes across many different administrations that is used to, someone mentioned budget gimmick. That's really all it is, especially when we have the funds this year to make sure that we don't need to use budget gimmicks. We have a large surplus, and this isn't that much money. We should be funding things the way they're supposed to be funded, especially when it comes to this, because it's money that people are paying on their electricity bill that they think is going to the societal benefits charge. They think it's going to benefit society, and unfortunately, it's just being used to plug holes and to, just move money around to where it shouldn't be going.
I mean, I think while, it's true that in relationship to the overall state budget, it may not be a huge percentage. But in terms of the impact, the job creation, the types of programs that could be supported, you can do an enormous amount of good, as Drew was saying. I mean, Andre, I hope will be on a panel later on. Runs for New Jersey a sort of state-of-the-art center that, from my perspective, ought to be 10 times the size that it is. The need is there, and if the state is serious about making the transition to zeroing out its carbon footprint by 2050, that's going to require a huge workforce. And that's this money needs to go to that. You can't say that you're serious as a state about addressing climate change if you're, using a funding gimmick to fund public transit, which is vital to get people to work and home and to their loved ones, and which is a huge part of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. You can't be funding that by a budget gimmick by taking money away from the other source of money that's supposed to be funding clean energy. You can't do it. And I think that, I'm obviously not a politician, but I do think that you've got an opportunity to turn this. I think that there's a sensitivity, there's a sense that this is not right. There's a level of discomfort in the establishment, and a good, consistent push, with some good vigilance afterwards to make sure that people don't backslide, could really pay off in the long term.
uh, uh, Reverend Harper, Drew, wasn't there didn't the bill get started at the end of the session to block the raise to the clean energy?
Yeah, there was a piece of legislation, I believe it was actually, yeah, it was last session. So it hasn't moved this session. The way the legislature works, they work in 2-year blocks. If a bill doesn't pass by the end of the last 2-year block, it basically has to start all over again. And we're in a new, we're 6 months into the new 2-year block. So it hasn't moved, but there was a bill that would have required, and it would have been through constitutional, to remember, I've looked back at the bill, but it was a step down of how much could be diverted from the Clean Energy Fund eventually to zero. It was a multi-year step down, but that didn't, end up being passed at the end of last session, and it hasn't moved anywhere this session. Unfortunately, as we too often see, it's one of those things that it always comes too late after something bad happens, and we're not proactive on things at the state level sometimes. And so it was, after the budget had already passed, after there had already been diversion, and then people are like, oh, it's not an issue anymore because they're not thinking about it until we see the budget next year. And then everybody, gets excited around this time of year, and it just is the perpetual cycle. So really it's time to just end it and make sure that, when we see it in the future, that it doesn't happen every year. It doesn't have to happen. There's no reason for it to happen. So when we have, especially the funds this year, the state is not in a cash-strapped area. We need to just use money as it's supposed to be used. Stop the gimmicks.
Yeah, definitely, because actually we're also working on the partner bill, which was NJA 5024. I'm also part of TSTC, which is the Tri-State Transportation Campaign, and we have a bus rider group, and we actually was working with Assemblyman Benson to put together the Riders' Bills of Rights. And the Rider Bills of Rights is to make sure that we have sufficient buses that's being online and they run properly. The buses are clean. Like say, for instance, if they're doing construction work, that they be able to have notifications properly notified, so bus riders would know that at this particular time that the bus might be down the street or around the corner. And so I guess, like you said, it's like, how do we hold them accountable? Like you said, the only way we can hold them as accountable is by continuously, writing to them, calling them, emailing them, be able to put op-eds in the newspaper or rally. It's many different types of ways. And also self-educating yourself on these issues and how things are connected. And go to your city council's meetings, go to your all legislators meetings, whether it be federal on down to the local level. And this is the ways that we can create change and make our community better, because it's our voice that makes things work.
Is there a way that we can work with the current, Assembly and Senate in order to get them to recognize the importance of, if the funds are for clean energy programs, as we've demonstrated, then they need to stay for clean energy programs?
I just briefly, I think there's a I know that there's a baseline level of awareness there. I mean, Reverend Tuff, in your day job, you coordinate a bunch of GreenFaith circles. And I remember that you met with Gordon Johnson,
Yes.
in the Central Bergen Circle several months ago. He was aware of this, and he essentially said, pester me till I do it. So I think that there is a real opportunity with this. It'll take the kind of grassroots knowledge about and passion around, here's what's needed, but I do think it's doable. And I think that Drew's right to say, go for it this year while the budget's flush, but then be clear that it's not like just a one-year reprieve. I mean, this money needs to stay going into the community. And I think it would be really good to, get a group together that has different expertise areas, community interests, and can speak to the to the legislature in a way that is well-informed and that represents the community's interests.
So I guess what we could do is take all the
Hold on
information.
One second. Drew
Okay,
was
I'm
gonna
sorry.
say.
And I was just gonna say, you know, the budget is currently in the legislators' hands. They have until the end of June to make their changes to the governor's, excuse me, proposed budget and pass the budget. So they have the power to take this out. And if, you know, take this rate out and fully fund the Clean Energy Fund, they can do that in the next couple of weeks. So again, I mentioned Senators Wicker, and we have a couple other legislators already signed on. The resolution went in last week or 2 weeks ago, which it's S373. You can call every legislator, senator, assembly can support this. And the more you have support for that, the more likely it is to be in the budget with the resolution that would stop these raids. And if those raids are, if those raids are stopped, it ends it, because the governor doesn't have the ability to put new money back into something, even though it's a really powerful and odd situation in New Jersey. He can't put money back in that the legislature has taken out once they pass their budget. So we can do something this year in the next couple of weeks. It isn't a foregone conclusion that the diversion is going to happen this year, and it will take people calling, people reaching out to their representative, saying you want to see this ended. And you know, thankfully, with state legislator, it's a whole lot easier. Federal gets all the attention, but like you may live, you know, 50 miles from the district office of your senator, or you might live, you know, or 20 miles from the district office of your House representative. But your state representative, there are 40 districts. So you're really not that far normally. And some of them have multiple offices. You can go to them and you can go knock on their door and talk to them. You can, you know, look them up and call them. And if you're a representative, they're more likely to talk to you. And, you know, because they know that they have to do constituent services. These are smaller districts. So reach out to them, tell them to sign on.
Tanisha,
Yes.
what is your experience? And because we talked about being persistent, knocking on doors, what is your experience in trying to work with the state legislators and assembly people?
Oh, we've been fighting for this for over 3 years, literally 3 years on the same topic. But it was so funny because we just had a ceremony, it was several months ago, and they had another bill where it's about safety for bicyclists. And they fought that bill for over, I believe it was like over 10 or 15 years. And he finally passed it like within last year. And we was like, wow. And what it is just like, and it was one particular representative that held that bill up. And I think once that person left, then it was freed and then he passed it. So that's why I guess it goes back to the importance of voting. You vote the right people in, we get what we need. So that means we need to be educating on the electoral percent, you know, and it's like, and I think that's where our power comes from, because we elect them in these positions. So like you're saying, Reverend Harper just mentioned that we should do a sign-on. Well, he could mention more about that, but I guess it's going back to different organizations that we have. What we can do is put together a list of the emails. So if you would like to join us virtually and also physically, to be able to strategize so we can have these ongoing meetings and group meetings. And then Reverend Harper, feel free to talk about how we could put together the sign-on letter so we can put more pressure on them.
Go ahead, Reverend.
I think the letter is self-evident. To me, I think the thing that's most important is, you know, to sound like a broken record, I think there's a real opportunity for Black and brown communities in the state to have some influence over how these resources are used, which is absolutely the right thing to do and is really important. So I know Reverend Tuff is already doing quite a bit of work around this, but if there's a way that GreenFaith can be supportive of NJBIC on this, we'd be very glad to be.
John, you have a question?
Yes, Ms. Garner, thank you so much, and the rest of the panel for being here. You started your presentation by talking about the new venture down on Fieldhouse Avenue, Set Boyd. And for those in the audience who are not familiar with that section of Newark, there's so much going on down there. The State Valley, sewage, the Essex County Jail, the Newark Police Department firing range, and they have New York City coming in using the fire range, so there's noise pollution. There's a, I don't know if it's still there, but there was a recycling plant, disposal plant on Fieldhouse Avenue, the airport with noise, and Port Newark, second largest port in the nation. You know, when they talk about, and I listened to the presentation when they talked about bringing in that movie venture down where Seth Gordon is presently. When they talk about these ventures, do they include, and the Ironbound is such an important entity in the city of Newark, especially for that section of Newark, do they include organizations like yours when they're doing this planning and talking about doing those things in that section? And is Seth Gordon considered a part of the Ironbound?
No, Seth Gordon, that's the South Ward, because that's closer to the airport. Oh, so now, however, we have Terrell Homes, which they're right now they're transitioning, and it's so sad because I guess when you look at documentaries, especially about the city of Newark and how HUD has been failing even in the late 60s and 70s, especially when you think about the riots in the 60s, and I believe that played a pivotal part in our community and the structure of how Newark, and then you think about all the institutions that's in Newark, especially Rutgers is older than America, 475. So when you think of that and the institutions that we have, like for instance, the Prudential Financial, that plays a pivotal part within the whole country and throughout the world due to insurance, which is worth billions of dollars. And you're trying to tell me you cannot resurrect Newark? They choose not to resurrect Newark. And then it's like, and we are disproportionately, and how the representative from the governor's department was talking about Abbott and how they were supposed to send so many millions of dollars to fix our school system, which you brought in charter schools that are failing, that is losing the actual charter. So what do we do in situations like that? You know, like I said, it has to go back into empowering the community. The community must know thyself. If you don't know thyself, you will be doomed and plagued for anything. So how do we start educating ourselves is by one, it starts with the child and the parents. You have to educate that parent to educate that child. And it's about us as a community coming together. When you see one doing wrong, you say something in a way that you're uplifting others. And like I said, if we have these council meetings, you go to your council meetings, you go to your zoning board meetings, you go to the planning board meetings, because the planning board meetings and your zoning board meetings dictates how your community is going to be. And when you say, do they bring us to the table or acknowledge us? They might tell you a couple of days before, which does not give you enough time to do your investigation so you can know what questions to ask at a zoning board meeting. Like for instance, we had MX3. MX3 is part of, it's like a redevelopment plan. They literally changed a zoning ordinance to allow them to build up to 20 stories high. What we did as the community, we came in, we went to every meeting that they had. Unfortunately, we wanted as our at ours as 8 stories because historically that's how the zoning is. Unfortunately, it got up to being 12 stories. Well, just a simple fact that we went in and we made our voices heard. We had the power to change. It's all about negotiation. How do you negotiate the best deal for everyone? Like for instance, I was in a meeting with for the Ballantyne Brewery, because the Ballantyne Brewery just got bought out, and they're building a new residential complex. And in the city of Newark, we have this thing called the inclusionary zoning, which I'm also part of Homes for All, and we actually helped with that process. And we also advocated and went to meetings at City Hall. And in the city of Newark, it's supposed to be a 20% set aside. That means a medium of 80 to 40% of low income or impoverished is supposed to be able to have apartments in that particular building. And what they're doing is they're not giving us our full 20%. And I think that's the problem. And by me being at that meeting, and we end up negotiating for several apartments in that one particular building. But what happens when they put it into the trust fund, that does not mean that that inclusionary 20% is particularly going to that part of that city. That means it could be expedited to another part of the city that might not be deemed. So when you look at the Ironbound, which has a low ratio of African Americans in that community, that automatically makes that disproportionate, especially when you're going to tear down Terrell Homes, which literally is behind Riverfront Park. And then you think about the dynamic of when you think of the Ironbound and the beauty of a park that has a river that's polluted because Agent Orange was dumped in there, because, you know, Agent Orange that was part of the Vietnam War was made in the backyard of the Ironbound in Newark. So these are the things and the dynamics that we have to look at, and we have to be the voices to make that thing change. And everyone, no matter what color you are, we all have to come together. No matter if you're rich or poor, we all have to come together. Because at the end of the day, even if I was wealthy, do I really want to spend $2,000 on an apartment? Yes, you give me beautiful amenities, but what about the square feet? What about the high ceilings? And they're not doing that. And you're outpricing people. And this is not just a city thing. This is a nationwide epidemic. So what do we do, you know, as a collective to make sure that we're all working together to be able to make sure that everyone has a decent and a beautiful place to live?
Thank you. I'd like to reiterate, Drew, the programs that the Clean Energy Fund is supposed to support. And I want you all to know that that the Clean Energy Fund in your electric bill is called a societal fund, that you pay that, and I just want Drew to go over what it just mentioned, the programs that it's supposed to support.
Yeah, as I mentioned, you know, I believe it's the biggest program they support, which is about 1/5 of the funds, like I said, post-raid in their current budget, is Comfort Partners, which you apply to as low and moderate income folks, anybody making 250% or less of the federal poverty line. And that allows you to, you know, renovate basically your appliances, make sure you can put in proper insulation, all in the with the purpose of energy efficiency, so that you can lower electricity bills for folks, which is always, you know, such a huge burden to so many folks, especially at that level of income. And that's available throughout the state. There's also other aspects of that program, like free information about where to get products that are energy efficient, stuff like that. Other major programs in it, you have things like things that are going right to the communities, like LED streetlight replacement, which is going to help municipal budgets by lowering their cost. You have this year the Heat Island project, which I think we've mentioned a couple times. Like, we all know the problem of heat islands. One, it increases, you know, energy usage because people are using their AC more just to stay cool, as well as just generally the public health issues with heat islands. So this is right, you know, going in, especially into our urban communities where you see that heat island effect. And so that's an exciting pilot that's there that could be funded at a much larger level than it currently is. This year, they're proposing $2.5 million for it. So that could go up, especially in coming years if we don't have these diversions. Community energy grants, so that communities can plan how they want to electrify and to increase energy efficiency, electric vehicle programs, and then money to that goes to the Economic Development Authority to put into renewable projects such as offshore wind, such as solar, which are going to be building jobs, and of course, energy efficiency and all those things. Ton of jobs in that as well that go right to the communities. I think you mentioned, you can't if these things are being built in New Jersey, you can't outsource your jobs. These are jobs for people. Energy efficiency is for people in the community who are installing these type of things. These are important programs that both are going to lower people's electricity bills, so improve quality of life in that way, put more money back in people's pockets, are going to help the climate by reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, both by reducing our total energy use, but also promoting clean energy, and create good jobs right here in the state of New Jersey. And again, we are diverting roughly 1/8 of that this year in the proposed governor's budget. So we need to stop that. It's only, I say only, it's a huge amount of money, but in this grand scheme of the state budget, $83.3 million. Like, that's a small amount when we have surplus. Like you said, Reverend, this is something that can't be a one-time thing. This needs to happen forever. But this year is the opportunity for us to finally end it. And then it's saying, well, let's just continue that in the future. Let's continue that no rates. But this is the year that we can finally do it after 12, 13, 14 years of raids of this program that does a lot of good stuff for our state.
So Reverend Harper, and you said, I'll just reiterate how we could work together, and Sharonda, who is the first vice president of New Jersey Black Issues, and also a great assembly person. Reverend Harper, how do you say we could work together with our assembly and our Senate?
I think, and my colleagues here may know more of the details than me, but I think there's a real opportunity to do, a letter from New Jersey Black Issues Convention to every single legislator, to have some kind of joint statement, or, it's not for me to say exactly what to do, but to speak out and to say not only that the raids ought to stop, but that there ought to be much more substantial community involvement in determining how the funds are used, so that it's for the benefit of the communities that have been, let's face it, paying into this fund forever and a day. This is more than $1 billion we're talking about now that's taken. That's a lot of money. All of the research shows that, that when you invest into clean energy, you create substantially more jobs than you do when you invest into fossil fuels. So we know that there's a strong job creation potential. We know that there's a need to redo the infrastructure of the state to protect folks from the fact that there are going to be stronger heat waves. When the temperature stays higher for longer, that's terrible for people's health, for our children and our elders in particular, but for everybody. It's just not, it's not okay. So GreenFaith is ready to support in terms of help, if it would be helpful to draft, do a first draft of a letter, because sometimes it's easier to mark something up as opposed to creating it from scratch or whatever. But I think that there's a really important opportunity to make a big difference with this.
Yeah. And I'll just add, we have about 3 weeks. So if you're excited about this, don't want to wait for a letter, feel free to call your legislator, look them up, and tell them that you just want to end the clean energy fund rates. You don't need a million details. You can just say that, there's the actual resolution already in there, so they can find it. You talk about clean energy fund, they'll get the message. And the more people that can call and email, you don't have to wait for a big letter. Just do it. You can do it. You can go in and be aggressive with it.
Tanisha?
Yeah, or tweet.
Tweet, sure.
Everything's social media now. That's a good way to get them through social media. But yeah, we just got to keep going, keep pushing at the end of the day. Yeah.
Madam Chair, are there any questions as it relates to the raid on because as you can see, this goes into work readiness, work, which is the next panel, and this goes into investments in our cities, as you can see, as it relates to the construction, which we mentioned in Newark, New Jersey. So you can see how important it is to support that clean energy money ought to go to clean energy programs. So at this point, Madam Chair, are there any questions that the panelists can answer?
I'm looking at the chat right now, and not yet has a question come up, but maybe someone here has some questions. And I'm going to bring the microphone over because earlier we want to make sure that everyone on virtual hears each question that you have. I'm sorry for moving in front of you there. And I'm going to hug my first vice chair, Assemblywoman and chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, for coming in today. So thank you very much. Give your name.
I'm Andre Thomas from Isles. I just had a question, and I was just thinking about the budget, right? And the state having budget issues. I was just wondering, with the legalization of marijuana, wouldn't that create enough revenue to have them not have to raid the fund and will fill some budget gaps? Just wondering, is that part of the argument, or we're raising that argument to justify not touching the clean energy fund and using that revenue to take care of budget issues?
So
Who would like to answer that?
I can only start, I know if other people want to add on, but I'll just say, so with the legalization of marijuana, there is going to be a significant amount of tax revenue coming in. That money going through, I'm going to blank on, because this is not an issue I work on all the time, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, thank you, Assemblywoman. They're breaking down where that money should go to make sure it goes to communities, is being reinvested in communities that have been most impacted by the war on drugs. So this isn't really something that we've looked at, taking money from that, because that's going to other good stuff that we care about. We have a $10 billion surplus in the general fund. We have enough money to pay for $83 million to stop this raid and make sure New Jersey Transit is still fully funded. So we want to make sure that, all these good programs, we don't want to be the ones robbing Peter to pay Paul to pay for the clean energy fund, when there's so many good things that the marijuana legalization tax dollars are going to be going to as well.
Please raise your hand if you have another question or comment. Seeing none and hearing none, let me check the chat again.
Okay.
Reverend Tuff, you can go on if you'd like.
Assemblywoman Sumter, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot and just ask for just a short comment on the what we talked about, the rate for the clean energy fund.
Thank you, Reverend Tuff, and thank you to NJBIC for hosting these type of workshops, which elevate and amplify some of the structural and systemic racial disparities within our state. With a budget surplus that is historic, unprecedented, unlike anything we've ever seen in our lifetime, I can't say that we won't see it again, because we've never seen anything of this sort. I've been in office since 2012, when we were in the Great Recession, Depression, and New Jersey was one of the last states to come out of it. During the pandemic, while it was tough, the measures that we put in place as a legislature, in addition to with the governor and this body, actually came into play to lead to a surplus. A corporate business tax, a 0.1% increase on the sales tax, a gas tax, all of those pieces came into play to give us the $10 billion in growing surplus that we see today. How long will it last? That we're not sure of. But in the legislature, part of our task has been to come up with budget resolutions that will plug the gap, that will sort of be a one-time infusion of cash on structural pillars. We talk about clean energy, but what does it mean in an urban community with old housing stock, poor air quality, high health issues that has never fully been repaired since the great industrial era? One of the things that I've heard as I came in to this session was, yes, letter writing to all of the members, finding the budget resolution number, and I'll make sure that we take time to find that.
373.
373, S373. There'll be an assembly companion to S373, because as we fight over the next several days at this point to see what stays in the budget, what comes out the budget, we need to amplify this, because it's not only jobs in this space, it's also the creation of product in this space. And it's also the building of trust in this space where our communities, Black and brown communities, could not trust the government to deliver for the taxes that have been imposed on us to create true social equity and structural repair for societal harm that has been placed on us. Now, those things are a mouthful, but what I'm hoping in the advocacy efforts of NJBIC, which is our policy arm of the New Jersey Legislative Black Caucus, is to be the wind beneath our wings so that we can amplify that these funds should not be rated. There should be a conscious effort in a lockbox, if you will, to protect these funds so that they continue to support the clean energy initiatives that will impact our community and help us to have affordable energy bills, not only for our homes, but also for our businesses and for our commutes to work.
And you can be reassured that we have Reverend Tuff, who's going around to all the meetings and bringing the information back to our meeting for our executive board and for our regular general board to give us the information. But we only have a few weeks to really act. And I say today, we educated virtually several million people. So there's no reason why at least 12 should be going to the senators that are in your areas to let them know that we want this to happen and we want it to happen right away. Thank you so much, Reverend Tuff and your panel for bringing this issue to light. And thank you for putting a charge under all of us to do the right thing by letting our legislators know that we expect them to act. Thank you.